The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. The following video is aligned with TEAM, the Tennessee Educator Acceleration Model, which is the educator evaluation system used in Tennessee. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
Good morning, everyone. Today we welcome you to the ELL District Collaborative at College of Education, Middle Tennessee State University. We're here in the Center for Educational Media. We're so happy to have all the different districts here represented. You are the people who do the real work because you are with these children who are learning English, and your work is so very important. You can make such a difference in the lives of these children. So we're happy you're here. We're happy you are joining in this conversation and joining in this collaborative. This morning I want to introduce Rebecca Welsh, who is an educator in Manchester City Schools. She is presenting. I'll let her introduce the topics, but with that, we'll begin. Rebecca?
Good morning. So just to give you a little bit of background, when I first came to this and we were talking about presenting and topics and things like that, we were all in that small room in the back, and there were about 12 people here. And we were kind of choosing topics, and then from there we moved into this very large room, and I know that the capacity within the people who are attending has grown tremendously. So I will be the first to give a disclaimer that I am merely a pull-out ESL teacher. I am not a supervisor. I have no state rank. I'm just in the trenches. And I've been in the trenches as a classroom teacher, which I think may bring a little bit more to the table. I hail from Metro Nashville Public Schools. I got my master's in ESL at Lipscomb University because there was such a shortage and such a high need in Metro that they said, hey, if you'll go back and get that endorsement, we will pay a portion of that. And so that's when I said, sign me up, because at that point I was out on Nolensville Road. I get slightly amused at the number of people who come up and say, oh, you teach ESL, you must speak Spanish. And I think that would not have helped on Nolensville Road. I really needed more Arabic. I could have used some other languages, so I just tell people, I speak Smile. That's all I've got for you. I speak Smile. And so hopefully that will make an impact on these kids, and they'll want to learn more and more from that. It surprises me that really 10 years ago, had someone come up to me and said, you're going to start teaching kids who don't speak English. I would have looked at them and I would have thought, what planet are you living on? There's no way I'm doing that. I grew up in Murray County. I know we've got a representative here. Rural America for the most part. My mother was an educator. My grandmother was my third grade teacher. So we come from a long line. And then we moved from there up to another rural area. And predominantly there was only one language spoken. But then following my minister husband around, I end up in Metro. And then those jobs they're trying to get people in would be heavily loaded with English second language students. And so that's what made this become a little bit more appealing. And I think some of that is good to know too, because as I took this topic with a little bit of interest and a little bit of background and started just to do that Google search on grading newcomers, grading ELLs, things like that, there is still not just a whole lot out there, as we're going to see as this presentation continues. So I think that it's really neat to see how many people are in here, and just to kind of know that as far back as what education goes, we are all now on the front lines of a lot being learned about ESL and about how those students progress and the education that they need. So back to our topic, which is the grading ESLs. I want you to take just a minute and I want you to think about something that you believe to be, or it may not even be what you think, but what you think generally people think of as an absolute in education. An absolute in education. I'll give you one quick example from way back when. As I mentioned earlier, my grandmother, she was my third grade teacher. She'd been teaching forever. Well, she passed on a book to me. The pages are very worn. And chapter 1 is When the Student Chews Gum. Yep, back to Behavior Management 101. Back then, that was an absolute in education. I mean, that was trip to the office, calling your parents, how dare you chew gum in the classroom. So just thinking about today, take about 2 minutes, talk with somebody else. Anybody, sometimes that stirs on thoughts about what you perceive to be an absolute in education.
You can have fun together and you can see them grow, that engagement can grow, that's why they.
I mean, you stop and think about how our kids respect us, and it used to be that way across the board for every child. That's good. That's good. Okay, good. You know,
Yes, okay, good. We'll get that
I don't know how y'all do middle school.
Okay, here we go. I've heard some interesting things. Absolutes in education, and it can run the gamut. Okay, who's got some ideas? We can shout them out. A little game of outburst here. We'll start this way. Go ahead.
I taught, and I won't say which middle school, but I've been at a middle school for the past couple of years, and it was consistent that I would be told F you by students as I was walking down the hall, as they were walking down the hall, and I was just told by the administration, oh, that's just so-and-so, he just does that, just ignore him, just let it go. If
Okay.
that's the worst he does, that's okay.
So you feel that an absolute in education should be 0 profanity use by any student?
It would be nice.
That would be nice. Okay, I can hold to that.
A little respect for teachers
Yes.
and authority would be nice.
Yes, okay, an absolute in education. All right, in the back. Ladies?
We discussed cell phones
Okay.
and how, teachers or some teachers have the no cell phone ideas, that, 0 cell phones in class. But we were talking about the iWatches, Apple Watches,
Yes.
how, you can take up cell phones now, but they can still have access to it on there.
That is true, and that's definitely becoming an issue. We've even had that in our lower elementary. My niece even owns one because it also works as a lovely tracking device for your student, and you can see that. So that might be an absolute for teachers, and then sometimes you can get an absolute from parents. Ooh. Okay, next group.
I said the idea of always looking adults in the eye. The adult always wants the child to look at them when they're being spoken to.
That makes sense? Yes, makes perfect sense. Okay, right here, this group.
Well, I just said attendance, like,
Show up.
the bottom line, like,
Be in
you need to be
school.
there. Like,
Yes. Yes, that's a good one. That's a good one. Be at school. Yes,
May I address what she said about looking teachers in the eye?
sure.
I taught in Utah, and I taught Navajo students who were taught that it is disrespectful to look teachers in the eye. And there are other cultures that feel that also. And so we have to, especially as teachers who teach so many diverse populations, we have to be aware of that.
Oh, yes. And there will be many ideas thrown out here that's what I'm trying to convey, is that while some people feel like this is an absolute, then we go back to the question, is it really an absolute? Okay, so we'll get there. All right, this group up front, any more of your opinion an absolute?
We were talking about making your classroom a safe space where they want to be there to learn.
Okay, absolute. Same over here?
we talked about attendance and respect also, respecting your teachers and obeying them. Like years ago, that was an
Understood.
ultimate.
Yes, it was understood. That's just what you did. Everybody, there was no exceptions. That was an absolute. Okay, front row.
Appreciation for differences between students and teachers.
Okay, absolute. All right, next.
I would think accessibility of instruction.
has to be an absolute.
Absolutely.
We can't say those are your kids, those are everybody's children.
Kids. That's a good one too. Good one too. When I began teaching, or I came back from teaching, I actually stayed home for 7 years with my kiddos. So I came back into teaching coming from Kentucky, and things had changed quite a bit. And so I'm going to this team meeting, and there's 7 members of our first grade teaching team. And the idea was brought up of grades. And I had two coworkers, and they're like, oh no, we're not talking about grades. We know how everybody gets about that subject. That is taboo. We are not talking about grades in team meetings. And I was like, what's the big deal? You know, talking about grades, how students are graded? No, it became extremely competitive. How the A from your classroom is not the same as the A from my classroom. I feel like more students should make A's and encourage them, especially when they're as young as first graders. And it just went back and forth and back and forth. And so that brings me to my next question. What is the purpose of a grade? I think that's something that as we begin with the end in mind, what is the purpose of a grade? So that's something I would really like for you to talk to clusters, cluster groups. You can turn to the back, turn to the front, but be thinking, what is the purpose of a grade?
I think it's interesting how we do grading in lower elementary and then how that changes. I guess the purpose of a grade should be to determine mistakes and when time.
The screen kid, you think this kid, they're going to be really low, or it might be really high, and they turn out to be just the opposite of what their grade shows.
Right. Well, no, hold on. What are we talking? That's a score on a test.
Okay, so good discussions going on. Let's come back and we'll bring that discussion to more of the room. Okay, do we have any volunteers who would like to just kind of outburst? What is the purpose of grading? And there will be multiple answers. I was brainstorming this question myself, and I had numerous bullet points coming, and then I was even arguing with myself. So the good thing is at least I won. But okay, go ahead.
To gauge mastery.
To gauge mastery, okay? Would you say mastery of grade level?
Mastery of grade level or content standards, depending on what population you're discussing.
Okay. Okay, somebody else?
Feedback for the student and the parent.
Feedback for student, parents, anybody else in that list? Teachers, administration. And beside teachers, I would even add to that current and moving forward. Because I think that's where a lot of discussion comes from, is what did you teach this kid last year? And why are they in my grade this year? No. Okay.
I think grades also show progress in ability, in effort, especially for our ESL population students.
Okay.
They will not be able to master the content, but if they're making an effort to do their very best, somehow that needs to be shown, even though they're not able to master that content.
Okay, so it's really condensed to effort. Is that what you're saying?
Progress of effort.
Progress and
yes.
effort. Okay. Good. Good. Oh, go ahead.
I think an offshoot of this is motivation, right? Like, so I think that's a classic piece.
Good.
Because not all people are motivated by a grade, obviously. I've worked in a high school before, and that is clear. But I do think that is a motivating feature. It's an extrinsic motivation that pushes us to you know, whether it's an arbitrary scale or not. I mean, it still motivates us. So.
Great. Okay. That's good.
It's a brief narrative of what the teacher is doing.
Ah, okay. Brief narrative of what the teacher is doing. Okay.
In a way, it can be a comparison to one another. I mean, I don't want, with my own children, you know, I don't want the teacher saying, these kids are A's, and these kids are B's, and these kids are C's. But I mean, in a sense, I don't think we like to think of it that way, but it is a way to, I mean, in a sense, yeah, to compare kids. You know, I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that's true, right? You know?
In a way, because they're going to be compared on tests, on major exams and assessments and stuff. So,
And in the world.
Yes, and I mean, your mastery, your proficient and above is going, you know, you need to see that. So, and our ESLs may not be there, but they can always work towards that.
I will tell you something along those lines that I started doing more from that parent side coming into the teacher world, is that I started sending out a state of the class. When I gave a summative assessment, then attached to that parent newsletter was a state of the class on assessment number 2. And so it would tell how many A's, how many B's, how many C's, how many did not pass, you know, or needs improvement. There were no names attached to it, but I did that and people were like, I'm not sure about that. I said, why? They said, I don't like that because my kid was one who was one that did not pass. And I said, honestly, this is not even as much about your child as much as it is about the teacher, to your point. Because that way you could see if we had a majority or even, you know, a fourth of the class, you know, performing so low, then that comes back to me. That's on me. And so that's what I would tell my parents is this is my way to communicate to you that, you know, here's what's being taught. The following students, this is attainable for most students unless there is a plan to help your student in a different direction. But I think that's an excellent point. Excellent point there. Okay, so we have purpose of grading. And I think that's something, oh, go ahead, Marilyn.
I think a big purpose is to guide our lesson plans, to guide our instruction.
Guide instruction,
to know
good.
when to reteach.
Yes, knowing when to reteach, that's actually another point, is, you know, is reteaching necessary?
I would just add too, like I think globally speaking, the grade, we use those, whether we like to admit it or not, we use those to kind of funnel kids in different directions, you know, eventually long term. So, you know, kids that are performing it because they're shown to have mastery or to be able to master certain, subjects and so on, we use that to determine who's going to get scholarships and who's going to get, you know, so it's a way that we funnel people within a society and
that's true.
Who is going to end up being this type of job and who's going to end up being this. I mean, that's part of it.
Mm-hmm. And then you have, I think, the subjective part of grading, and then you have the testing part of grading. And do those things align? We'll use a blanket school to where it gets you also into arguments of if students qualify for RTI, should we see those names on honor roll? You know, checks and balances on things, that gets a little tricky. And then we shift over from, okay, do we feel this way about grades and grading for just the general ed population, and how much of that applies to our ESL population and either other students that may have different needs? And how do we communicate with that? So I want to take just a minute, just a quick little side note, just to say how much I appreciate the discussion that has already happened. And if you're like me, my to-do list right now, I mean, is from floor to ceiling. And so sometimes, you know, in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking, I still don't have anything for Uncle Jeff, you know, to go under the tree. I mean, I'm as human as what you all are. And so I was thinking about this. Sometimes it is so helpful to just set aside a time frame to think about something like this. This is a topic that I feel is going to come to play at various meetings. It's going to come to play between you and a parent at conversation. It's coming out in grade level teams, things like that. So I'm like, if you can just keep taking the rest of this time, and let's just have this time to think about it and discuss it. And in a little bit, we're even going to get to some self-motivated research on it, just because, hey, what else are you going to do today? You're here. You know, set this time aside and let's really make some professional gains. Because I personally, I don't like coming to PDs where it's just a total lecture style format and I'm not getting anything from it. My thought is if I can take 3 things away from a professional development, and maybe the bar's low there, but if I can take 3 things away from it, I'm pretty happy. As a professional, I'm like, yes, I can take it away, I can implement it, or it will affect my philosophy of education going forward, okay? So here's a question for you. What do you feel that grading looks like in your district? I feel like we don't have many opportunities to see what's happening where, and so I think if we can use this time just a little bit to get some feedback as to what is grading looking like, especially at this point we're going to move to ELs. What does that look like in your district? And my follow-up question will be, do you think it's working well?
So what does grading look like for EL specifically?
Yes, in your district, yes, yes. I'm kind of getting toward, let me give a qualifier there. Are your students, are they getting ESL grades, but yet modified grades is maybe a box on the report card that's checked? I came from that. That's the case in Metro. Manchester City Schools, there is no box. Eduardo's grade is looking just like Jesse's grade, and they are being graded very differently. So that's kind of the feedback that I would like to hear, just as to what's going on in different districts. Okay, I have about a couple minutes. Think through that.
We didn't have a box.
Warren County didn't have a box. I mean, we pretty much don't fail our ESLs. Because we've really got a box check if you do. Sorry.
You're going to have to deal with it right now. Because they physically, like, he just walked in the door in the 4th grade. Or is it 4th, 3rd? Whatever grade is like the highest grade that standards is. Like, he cannot do these standards. The end cannot, but they can't give him higher, like he is going to get 1s because we're working on sounding out words, you know.
Okay, I'm getting encouragement from this side of the room. They want to hear more of the discussion that's going on from even the larger groups as to where you are. So,
what are you doing?
When I work with high school students, my question for the student, if I am informed that this child is having a problem in a gen ed class, my question is, what does the teacher want from you? And then my job as an ESL teacher is to help the student reach what the teacher is requiring. I find that the grading practices are as diverse as the teachers are. Now, for me personally, when I am teaching an ESL class, my grade must be reflective of my assessments, which must be reflective of my objectives, which in turn must be reflective of the standards. That's me. That may or may not be the case in another classroom.
Another group? Another district?
One thing that's really changed in our county right now is our elementary has moved to standards-based report cards, which is great for our EL kids. Except you have to kind of tell some of those overachieving mamas and daddies that it's okay that they're getting a 1 because they just walked in the door in the 3rd grade 0 English. But we've also moved to a standards-based common assessment. So everybody uses the same assessment for the report card scores. So, and it's broken down to, for this standard, here's the 4 levels. If they can do this problem, they get the 1. But if they can do this problem, they get the 3, you know, and so it totally makes it across the board the same because we do the pull out, and so like I travel between schools. So before this, seeing what this school gave a 3 and this school gave a 3 were completely opposite ends of the spectrum, to where now it is everybody's taking the same assessment. Those assessments don't go home. They're they're not published. They're on our county's, what's it called?
Live binder.
Live binders. But it's protected with a security code that changes. And so it's like, it's not something that parents can prep them for. And it doesn't, once it's graded, the teachers have it, but they don't send it home for mama to look at to help them study for next time kind of thing.
And it was great too, because we no longer have to explain why my EL student is on honor roll and your advanced child is on honor roll, because they're both getting accommodations. And for our parents that don't understand what an A means, they're just like, oh, he's getting an A's and everything. We're good, we're fine, we can walk away and not do anything else. But now with the standards base, your child's at a 1, and these are the standards you can walk home and talk to them about. And we can now have that conversation, whereas before it was like, he's making an A in reading.
Okay.
I don't know what that means, but he's making an A in reading.
Okay. So with that, would you say that even your more formative assessments then would just be for the purpose of feedback to the student and the parent?
In the school and the teacher and the, yeah.
I think that makes that case. That's, personally, that's my opinion. Okay. All right, somebody else. Go ahead.
I was in middle school for 2 years, well, 3 years. And it's well known, in fact, we give it from the state, you are not allowed to fail as a child because of language. Most teachers, instead of doing any accommodations or modifications, give them the same work and the same assessments as they do to everyone else in the gen ed population.
Yes.
And then turn around and just give them a 70 and say, oh, they passed.
I was waiting for that to come out. I honestly thought we would hear more of that, because that has been a lot of my personal experience in 2 different districts, because I feel like in general our teachers are not receiving much training. I'm hoping that's more of maybe what the end of this session, as well as going even into the second part of today, would be very helpful, perhaps even to take back if you all are facilitators of some training eventually.
I don't think they're receiving
And you will be, I'm
any
sure.
training that's mandatory.
Yes.
I think it's more optional, and the ones who want that training already have that interest and that heart to help. Another problem is that those teachers who knew me well enough would try to send the work from their classroom to my classroom, which is fine in maybe in elementary.
Yes.
But in middle school, when you've got 4 to 6 teachers who are all wanting to send their work to me,
Yes.
and then I have my own standards and
Yes.
my own things I'm required to teach,
Yes.
and I've got lesson plans and I have to do these things, then I can't be teaching your science to these students at the same time that I'm teaching someone else's math. I just don't have enough days in the week. And therefore, if you would just listen to me and make some accommodations or modifications in your teaching, because you can't expect a newcomer to the country to be given a blank notebook and to be told, copy all these notes that I put up on the screen. It's just not going to work. It's not reasonable to expect. And then when they didn't do that, that student would be sent to my room to be told they don't have their notebook notes.
Yes.
Well, no.
Yes. Yes. I feel like a lot of what you said is a tremendous, is where we are. And I feel like that identifies a lot of what we have to overcome as a group of educators, because I feel like you only have so many people trained to even recognize, hey, that's what I should be doing. And the 1 hour of pullout, it's just not gonna make it.
And your comment about does it work? No.
Okay.
It's not fair to the students. It's not fair to the teachers. It's not fair to those AP students who are doing all this work, and then to my newcomer, just got here from Guatemala, who doesn't speak a lick of English and who sits on a computer program and is not doing that work and yet comes out with a 70.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so another great part about signing up to be the presenter today is I also felt like it was a really good opportunity to get about 1 hour of Jan Lanier's time, so via a cell phone conference. So following the meeting in Shelbyville, to just even get her input and some clarification on a lot of questions that I had, especially about grading newcomers. So any more to add to the list of grading practices in your district, or does anyone feel like you are knocking it out of the park and hitting home runs? Okay, so where we are. So my first question was, and to your point about middle school and high school, I have a very good friend, and I'll just say she teaches over at Overton. She's been at McGavick. She has run the high school gamut of teaching ESLs and has been doing it for a very long time. And, you know, they're in the, 70s passing, or we're not passing, and where you are in that. And she says, you know, my kids at this point, they're old enough. They know, you can't fail me. You can't. And so if I sit over here and I sleep all day during class, who cares? And she said that for some of them, it's just get me until I can get out of here, get a job, go to work, and it becomes a serious motivation issue for the student. So one of my questions, but at the same time, especially coming from an elementary school background, I can understand why you don't want to give this newcomer failing grades. I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever. If I move to a different country, I am welcome to that country, I am here, then, you know, why would you fail me? You know, that doesn't make any sense, especially for kids, just for kids in general. So I asked her, I said, okay, with that system, who is ultimately responsible for determining how you grade ESL kids? Go ahead, guess. I want to see if people know or if it was just me pleading a lot of ignorance. So who do you think? Who do you think is responsible for your ESL grading system? Anyone?
I guess OCR says you can't fail them, so that'd be where it came from.
Maybe. Does it lie with the state?
Superintendent.
You are, ding, 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 you are correct. According to Jan, the superintendent has all power for how you grade ESL students.
In the district or?
In your district. In your district. That superintendent is who it goes back to. Because I was wondering that myself. And I think that is a very important question as grading ESLs and grading newcomers moves forward. So I triple checked the answer to that one. So why is that important, and what does that mean for our schools and our districts? And what might you recommend for that? So next question. In a pass or fail system, thinking about, because he has that power, he has the power, or she has the power to move your ESLs based upon scores that come back, what that number falls toward, and how long even they stay in whichever model. For instance, you move to a pass-fail only. I mean, it's out there. Districts are doing that, the more I dug into it. You only move to a pass-fail system. In other words, I have and I'm sorry, my background is in education. I wish I had more to offer middle and high school people, but I go to what I know. I have first grade. First grade has a unit based on, with social studies on state symbols. So can my ESL, even my newcomer, identify the tulip poplar, identify the iris, identify the location of the state of Tennessee, and the state insect? Pass or fail? You can do that if your superintendent tells you that can be the case. The other thing that they can do is they can put a time limit on that. So if you want, or if you think that it's in the best interest of your district to only allow that student to do that for the first year, like say they are a newcomer and they are in a pass-fail situation for the first year they're here, he or she can put that stamp of approval on that as well, which I found very interesting and could see as being helpful and beneficial. You know, you're on this grading system until you get more acclimated. Then once your skill gap is starting to close, then we're moving you to more of, and I say pass fail, I mean it's literally like a P or, you know, an F. And an F is that kid who's asleep. You know, that's the thing. Now, what are the repercussions of it? They fail. I didn't get to that point because I'm not quite certain what those repercussions are. So there's no point in me standing up here acting like I know.
So what would you do like, because they have to have so many credits to get to graduate.
That's the
Would it just
repercussion.
be the pass is the credits and the fail is no credits?
That was my understanding. That was my understanding, but again, that goes back to the superintendent, who I'm sure understands far more about that than what I do. But I did ask about that, so I thought that was pretty interesting. The superintendents, they have far more power than what I mean, I know they do a lot, but with grading, I didn't realize just how much they can do. Okay?
But I was under the understanding that if an ESL student is retained, no matter what year in school they are, that explanation has to be forwarded to the state as to the accommodations, modifications that teacher, that district has done. Am I incorrect in that?
That's correct. That's right.
So then how is it the superintendent and not the state?
That's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Let's say that in
You're in
eighth
a
grade, I
pass-fail
have a boy
system.
who just does nothing and sleeps all the time. And so he fails his classes, which I wouldn't have a problem with. And so he's retained, but then and the superintendent's all for that. But then that information as to accommodations and modifications for that student have to be sent to the state. And so how is it the superintendent who's responsible for those grades and not the state?
Well, maybe the superintendent has the freedom to decide what determines an F. And then if the child has an F, then the state is involved.
That would make sense.
My guess.
It's good. Go.
So basically, you all know Tennessee is very district-led, so every district has their policy and procedures. And so when it comes to our English learners, there are other laws that they're protected by OCR, where they have to be age appropriate, and retaining can be very difficult if you can prove that it's not solely based on language, and there are other things, but you have to make sure that district policies have that information. And so why it goes down to the superintendent as to being responsible for the grading is to make sure that those areas have been considered already and that they've been explained. Now, when it comes to failing and let's say, for example, when this has happened, someone steps forth and makes a complaint about a student being retained as an English learner, then you look at the other guidelines that they're under, the age appropriateness, they cannot be retained, they cannot be failed, and then that's when they start doing the whole portfolio analysis. Has the student received services? If it's behavior, have we implemented behavior support for the student? If it's not academic, and so there's like a whole profile that you look at for that student. But grading is very district-led in Tennessee. It is very district. So your superintendents are the ones that are, in hopes, working with the team in the district that are deciding on what grading looks like and what those policies are, because those policies can easily be pulled up online. And you probably did this. You notice that the grading is so different. Even the way parents engage in your districts. I know that there have been some areas of concern. Why don't we have parent support? Well, some of your policies make it impossible for some parents to be involved in the schools. If you really pull some up. I've looked at some, and it's very shocking.
Yes. Okay, so going back to that, the idea of pass-fail even, and breaking it down to where that education is accessible. I mean, first grade example, I know, first grade example, but still. Do you feel like there would be a shift in what I call the sleepy newcomer? The kid who may be showing minimum effort? Like, do you feel like if it moved to pass-fail to where you were offering that at the level that they could handle, like with the first grader, I'm not asking him for a whole lot of extra besides naming those state symbols in the location of Tennessee. Bring that on up, and I know it's not quite the same, but getting there with high school. Do you think it would make a difference?
It would all depend. Once again, I think it would fall back in the lap of the educator, and if they were willing to take that extra step to make sure that that sleepy newcomer had the accommodations or modifications and understood the concept of what was needed in order. I mean, I could be the sleepy newcomer today because, like I'm sure we all are, we're tired. It's almost to the end and we're exhausted. I think it has to come from knowing that that student knows that that teacher cares and wants a relationship and wants to help that student. You just can't say, you have to work 10 problems.
Yes.
And give me answers and then we'll see.
Yes.
I mean, I think but I think the thing about it is, I think it's an awesome idea. Are the educators, the regular ed educators, going to be willing to put forth the effort? And as a former teacher, I understand this whole concept, but set the guidelines for what would determine the pass and fail on top of what they're already required to do.
Here is my second question to Jan that I thought kind of piggybacked on top of this. I may not have all the information, but I can find it. Or I've got my list of who to call when. I was always under the impression that students, no matter what, had to receive grade level instruction. And that's what the grading had to be based on. Does that make sense? Like because I hear the struggles being like in 10th grade science. You know, it's like, no, you cannot teach anything else, or even 10th grade math, or, you know, just getting on into those high school subjects. And that they have to receive the instruction for that grade level. And then that's where grading comes from. Well, I got an answer on that one. Because I said, you get a kid who comes over here, maybe they have never been exposed to education, this is their age, this is the grade that we're putting them in, and then all of a sudden, we're grading them on things that they have no background knowledge, they have no foundational skill. What are we going to do with that kid? And I thought this was interesting. We are moving toward ILPs, and I think we're moving toward even that being the name of it. But at this point, what she is telling me is that no, that is already in place without an official name. So if you have that newcomer that comes in and they are in 4th grade and they're missing all of these skills, that it is up to a collaborative effort by the ESL teacher and the classroom teacher to come up with the plan of skills that needed to be scaffolded through the way and attain those foundational skills. But yes, you can give that 4th grader, you know, the question, where is Tennessee? Or third grade, I guess it's more Tennessee. And they're getting into more of the economics of it and everything else. But your bottom line can start with a very simple, you know, identify the 3 divisions, identify whether these are rural or urban areas. All of these are lower grade skills. They're going to build toward the 3rd grade.
So are we going to petition for or move towards their 1-year exemption being for all of 10 ready? Because like I have a 5th grader brand new to the country, so yes, he's going to be exempt from the ELA, but he's still going to have to sit through that science, math, and social studies test.
Yes. And sadly, I think that is something that gets tabled. And that's not going to be popular. That's not going to be popular. You know, teachers, they want their scores, things like that. But I think that at some point that teacher has to look at the common sense factor of, are you really thinking that in 1 year that kid is just going to blow it out of the water? Or even 2 years?
The teacher's like, well, that's going to count against me. What else do you want me to do? Like, it's not like I said, oh, I want it to count against you. Let me put them in your class, you know, like.
No.
And so that's why I was wondering if they would consider moving the exemption to all.
A little bit more, I mean, an advice on some of that is trying to find that emotionally balanced, grounded teacher to be part of that discussion.
Well, ours are departmentalized, so I have like
yes,
all the teachers. No,
yes, yes. But are you getting what I'm saying on some of that? I mean, that is your hope and prayer, is that at some point you've got a teacher that has moved a little bit further, can see the bigger picture. Yes.
How will this be enforced?
Yeah. Good question.
Yes.
So that was
said
my
that
next
too.
question to it. And it goes through that trickle. It will eventually get back. And here's the thing, and I mean, we all struggle with this, I feel like, because again, ESL is still, even though it's been around forever, and it may seem like I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth, and now I really have a lot of sympathy for Jan because I feel like every time I hear her talk, I think she has different scenarios or special situations going through her head as she tries to explain things that might be more of the general rule. So you're starting with your classroom teacher. The ESL teacher is somewhat vulnerable because we really can't do a whole lot to enforce things. That then goes to building principal. If your building principal is really not on board and may not be a huge fan or tries to better himself or herself on understanding of best practices for ESL, then we're moving on up and it's going to superintendent. But it is it's a big deal, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's a big deal. It's highly impacting the lives of a lot of kids.
Okay, so just to recap, what you're saying from Jan Lanier is that the ESL teacher,
yes,
and I'm in a middle school, so
yes,
I'm working with 7 different teachers,
yes,
8 different teachers.
Yes.
That those teachers and I can collaborate. I can sit down with my science teachers. We have a lot of newcomers at my school.
Yes.
I mean, we have 4 in the past week
yes,
that have no English. And I think that's probably, if we went around the room, that's probably consistent with a lot of people.
yes,
We've got in double digits of newcomers this year
yes,
that have no English. And that school has people that just want to, mostly, it's a great faculty and they want to help.
Yeah.
So I can sit down with those teachers and we can come up with, we can pare down some stuff and say, this is what we're going to base their grade on, and that is acceptable.
Okay, and here's the next thing, because as that classroom teacher, I've had that class of 23 kids, and you want 15 minutes of my time, maybe even 30 minutes of my time, and I'm already in my deer in the headlights, and my shopping list has grown even more. Here's the next thing that I thought was kind of a good breather, because that I also ask her is, who gives the grades? Who gives the grades?
I think that's an interesting question, and that's a very common question, because nobody gives the grades. The students earn the grades. Now, the responsibility of the educator then
Yes.
is not to give the grades, but to modify the instruction, not the assessment. If we modify the grade, then we can just give everybody a 70 and call it done, we're good. But what is that sleeping child getting? Nothing. And if we go to a pass-fail, then we're saying, you can sit there and sleep and I'll fail you, and it's just a failure. But it's the responsibility of the educator to make that class relevant to that student. What I would want to know is, why is that child sleeping? Is that child sleeping because he already feels like a failure, because he's a SLIFE student and has no background knowledge, has no English, or did that child work a 12-hour shift yesterday? Why? Why is that kid? And that's the educator's responsibility. That's why we're professionals and not machines.
To dig. Yes, good point, excellent point. And poor phrasing on my part.
But
to some degree. Yes,
That's
okay,
what
good.
we hear all the time.
Good.
How do I give a grade?
Yes.
You don't give a grade, you modify the instruction.
Yes.
And why should we deny a student the rich content that is available to all the other students? We scaffold it and make it. I deal with this on a daily basis. My kids tell me, I don't want to learn math. Well, fine, because then, and I teach high school, somebody's going to cheat you out of all your money. So don't learn the math. I'm cool with that. I get paid either way, whether you learn it or not.
Applicable.
And then all of a sudden, he wants to learn the math.
Yes. And okay, so even more to that, so he's wanting to learn math. Where are you going to start?
Where he is.
Ding, 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 ding. Good answer. So real quick, let me get this in though. So her answer to that, which I loved it, she said, who cares? Who cares? Is it the ESL teacher who is taking the grade, I guess would be my better phrasing, who is assessing the student where the student is? And I have to say that I am actually a stronger advocate of that. And I think that my opinion on that, and again, that's an opinion. This is the Rebecca Welch opinion, and I would love to hear yours because yours may be different. I would love to see that as the ESL teacher doing that. For one, I think that we are more willing to take that kid where they are and give that assessment than, and I go back to high school because I started out in secondary, and then the reality of grading all those English papers hit really, really hard. But I'm thinking, I did call, high school teachers, and I'm like, tell me how many students you have on your roster. 130. And I'm like, that teacher who has 130 kids, we're asking them to do this. We would love to do this. And here's the thing, in their heart, most teachers would love to do that. It just boils down to how many hours are in a day. And so I was very relieved because at one point I was only hearing the teacher of record is the only one who can give this grade, the teacher of record. And I was very relieved to hear her say, that is a collaboration, what works best for you. I will tell you from personal experience, because I had the integrated classroom, half of my kids were ESL, half of my kids were gen ed. My ESL that were scoring higher, that we were so close to closing that gap and getting them out of ESL services, those were the students that I was grading. The ones who were not near exiting, the ones who definitely had a much broader language deficit, that is who my pull-out teacher, she would do a lot of the assessments for that. Did that mean that all assessments took place out of the classroom? That's another thing, and that's where you really want that building principal on board. That's where that teacher collaborating would be so helpful, because in that science lab, they may be doing an experiment that kid can follow because it's hands-on, it's content related. Can you cover my class? So I can go down here, work with Johnny, see if I can get that modified grade in there. This is perfect. The teacher's not overwhelmed, the kid's not overwhelmed, and I think all of you in here are competent professionals, and I know you're not going to be overwhelmed.
I love that you said collaborate with the classroom teacher. My experience has been that the classroom teachers love the kids. They want to do what's best. They just don't know how, and they may not have the tools.
They do.
And we're the choir, so we kind of have the tools that we can share with them.
Yes, and I think the key is making the language for the teacher. Sometimes the teacher needs a little scaffolding too, because they're so overwhelmed. So I think when you go in to collaborate with that teacher, the simplicity of your language and the lack of intimidation that we're hoping they feel with you coming into their classroom, again, you are the champion of the student. You are not against them. You are not coming in there to evaluate them. You are in there to help them and to relieve some of their stress even. Last comment, and then we're going to go to break.
Could we go back to the assessment though and talk about that for just a second? Because I think sometimes our students, especially the newcomers, can give more on an assessment than they give if we don't modify an assessment. I think we need to modify assessments and accommodate instruction to where the student can tell what they know. In other words, can you match these words? Because to ask a student to write this word that's this long to them, that they're just learning, may be impossible, and they can't possibly sound it out. But if you give it to them, they might be able to put it in the right place, to where they've learned the material, and they could give it to you, but not in the same way the gen ed peers do. So I think we have to consider that, and I realize 10 Ready's not going to give them that, and we're trying to prepare for that, but we're trying to actually teach. And we need to understand that we are teachers, and that we need to build that scaffolding and build that knowledge so that these students can do better and know the grades on 10 Ready are going to kill us. I understand that, but we have to be willing to teach these kids. And I think a lot of teachers are so caught up in, oh, I have to teach all this because I'm graded on this 10 Ready score. I think that's one of the problems, that they don't want to take the time to take care of our students because that's hanging over their head as you're going to be a failing teacher if you don't do this.
And I would even like to challenge the thought even of the verb teach constantly is it's more motivate. I think that is where, when we begin with the end in mind, it's very hard, and I get that as a classroom teacher, not to zoom in on 6th grade That's what I teach, that's what I know how to get these kids from the beginning of 6th grade to the end of 6th grade. And I think it's much more about the motivation for learning for life, because that to me is the ultimate goal for these kids. We want them to be able to provide for their families, provide for themselves, to love learning. I mean, that's what helps me get through, you know, it's to love learning. Okay, so we're gonna break for 15 minutes and then we'll come back. And thanks again for all your participation. It's going well, I think.